Let's get it, man. Welcome to another episode of Men the Podcast. I am your co-host, Jordan Flowers. That's my boy Jacob Hill, and we are here to always encourage you to empower your narrative. And we are here for another episode of One with the Flow. I know it's been a minute since we did one of these, but we're really excited when we get a come on here and talk about current events. Get some laughs off, get some jokes off. But I know we got a couple serious topics to get to. So without further ado, Hill, start us off with our first topic. What we got on the board?
So the first thing let's talk about everything that's going on with Diddy or Sean Combs, of course. So if you don't know, Diddy was federally indicted in New York, I believe. But right now he is held in jail without bond, and right now they're kind of in the discovery phase where they've been conducting raids, been gathering up evidence for the upcoming trial that's probably going to be in like a year or two from now. I will tell you from the discovery phase and what's been going out, a lot of this stuff is egregious, to say the least. So we felt compelled to get on here and talk about it. And kind of the question that comes to mind that I want to ask you, Jordan, to start this off is kind of like when you see all of this stuff in the discovery and just all the stories you heard about Diddy and everything, what are some things that come to mind, and kind of what's your opinion about seeing all this stuff right now?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, first and foremost, I want to make sure that we put it out there that, just for what we are about here, is empowering people and to make sure that, people are seen in the best light and people aren't taken advantage of or harmed in any manner. So if these allegations and accusations, which I believe to be, true, which I'll get into a little bit, later, but we want to make sure that we send our love out to them because these are serious things that we're talking about when it comes to that, and I don't want to make light of that at all. Getting into the accusations, though, I think this is kind of like a dark side of Hollywood. Like when you always hear like this dark side of Hollywood type of things, I think when I hear these things, I think these are things that I think we kind of grew up and like we had a kind of concept of them, but these are certain things that I think that are taking place in those higher order rooms, the ones that got the most money and things of that nature. Not to say that money equates to you doing something so egregious and heinous as what Diddy is being accused to, but I think that you have more access to being able to do these things if you choose to do those heinous things. So when I first read through the allegations, I mean, my thing is this: I'm a guy, and I'll get on here and apologize if I am wrong, but I'm a person that firmly believes where there's smoke, there's fire. You know what I'm saying? You don't get there's a Cat Williams joke. Well, I'm not gonna make it. Maybe another time, but he talks about this all the time about like if somebody constantly says something about you, like it might not be exactly true, but it's something there. And I think this is certain things that we've been hearing about Diddy's for quite a while. And then you pair that with the terrible thing that he did to Cassie one that came out, I want to say earlier this year, the video that came out in the hotel footage and the domestic violence situation, which was just brutal. Like, and I think when you have so many pieces of evidence that start to come out, you see that like, hold on now, there's something here. Like this, there's some like credit here when people speak about this situation when it comes to him. So I mean, overall, I just think, I want to see the process, see its just due. I don't want to jump the gun. I do have my preset, notions and preconceived notions when it comes to what I believe is true. But when I think about these things, I think just like how much stuff that we don't see or don't hear about or get covered up in these places. When we talk about people that have good enough money to be able to have somebody like say, delete the footage or we gonna sign an NDAs or whatever the case may be when it comes to people that have money. So I'm just hopeful that anybody that's involved, they get the justice that they, that needs to come down on them, and also too just to protect the victims as well. But I don't think that I'm really surprised by this when it comes to Diddy, and I think this is a bigger conversation when we talk about the fame and the capitalism and the free market of when you have this money and the access you could do either to do good or you could do harm.
Yeah, so I'm gonna completely jump the gun here. I'm gonna say allegedly initially, so we're not gonna get sued here, but I think it's pretty clear. The evidence is pretty clear that whatever he's being charged with, and probably the charges that need to come later on, he's probably going to be guilty of it. I think that's pretty straightforward. There's a thousand bottles of baby oil. I will tell you right now. I live 2 blocks from a Walgreens, and I know for sure they don't have 1,000 bottles worth of baby oil in there. So I don't know how he ordered that. I don't know how that works. But for a more serious conversation, I know you mentioned capitalism. I don't think it's necessarily a capitalism and free market type of thing. I think it's more of a conversation on morality. When we were growing up, like you said, you always hear these weird things, Holly weird and all of this stuff. But I think the biggest conversation is about morality, and this is why they would say like, this is why you just shouldn't follow celebrities just because they're famous and many things like that is because you really don't know what they did or what they're willing to do to maintain their status and wealth. And that's really what it comes down to when I hear about this Diddy case. And then for the case that everyone forgot about, the Jeffrey Epstein case. It's one of those things where yeah, it's one of those things where, these very rich, higher up people, they sold their morality at a certain point to either get to that point where they have a certain amount of status or to maintain that certain amount of status. For any content creator, anyone that's trying to elevate in life, everyone's going to hit that point where is the money worth your morality? And you need to make that choice for yourself on whether you're willing to sacrifice your morality for the money or not. Here on our podcast, obviously, we're going to maintain the status that we want to keep our morality, and we're going to keep that consistent as we keep growing this thing. But that's a personal question you have to answer for yourself or for anyone around. So when I look at this Diddy case, it's not whether it's an innocent or guilty thing. It's a thing of what is morally wrong with these people? Not just Diddy, but everyone that's around them. There's plenty of victims in this, but there's also plenty of consenting adults that saw this was going on, participated in what was going on, or was complacent and not spoke out against what was going on and had the power to do so. So when I see something like this, it's one of those little resets in society to where we all need to look each other in the face and say, how far are we willing to really go to sacrifice our morality? Is this the point that we're at to where we're just perfectly fine with seeing this stuff? We're comfortable with seeing this around us. It's a bigger question for society as a whole. It's like, where are we and where do we want to go with all of this?
Yeah, and I think first and foremost, that was the perfect response. And I agree with everything that you said. I think when I talked about the capitalism and stuff like that, it was much more of like the access. When I think that you have that money, that you have much more ability to get away with certain things or cover up certain things. You know what I'm saying? Which again goes back to your point about morality, right? I just think that where the money lies, that's where the power lies, and I think when you have these people that come into endless amounts of money, that and their morality is out the window, and they get to cover up these things, it's like, dang, how much stuff goes on that we don't even notice. Or has this been the nature and the kind of the culture of for years, not only years to come, but maybe in the past, has this been going on and we just aren't in those rooms to hear or see it on a higher level? So those are the things that come to mind. But we'll keep to the update on the Diddy situation. I'm pretty sure we'll have another episode when things more come out and give some more explanation and our takes on that. But I do want to get into another serious topic that's been kind of going on around Twitter. And kind of we were talking about discussing, we were talking about topics what we're going to hit on today. And I was like, I felt really compelled to hit on this one, and that's Andrew Schultz, the comedian, who I actually enjoy some of his stuff. I think he is one of those edgy comedians within 2024 that kind of pushes the envelope a little bit, which I can appreciate to a certain extent. What I did not appreciate, though, is his last comments that he made on a podcast. I want to say last week's. I want to call it Shits and Gigs. These two British guys, black British guys, and they were discussing it was just a discourse about black women, and they got in there talking about, made some allusion or some comment to the effect of, I'm surprised that the person's not losing all their hair because they're dealing with the stressful life of just being around a black woman or having a black woman girlfriend. And and it sparked some what's the name, a lot of backlash as it rightfully should. And obviously, from me, I got a sister and a mother that I grew up with, and I seen that stereotype perpetuated all the time. And so, just from what you know about it, some of the things that we talked about, there's another thing that I want to talk about after the case, but I just want to get your initial thoughts when we talk about the Black woman experience. And you know how I feel about speaking about women in general as a male. I don't like it at all, unless they are in the room and we can have a very like back and forth, like constructive conversation. But I just want to get your thoughts on what Andrew Schultz was saying. Do people get away with masquerading jokes as how they actually feel? Is this like a level of microaggression that we see? What are your kind of thoughts about this?
That's an interesting question. So I'll try to break this in two parts. So we'll talk about Andrew Schultz on one side, and then we'll talk about Black people, Black community as a whole for the second part. So the first part that I'll say, because I listen to a little bit of Andrew Schultz. He's in that realm where it's not funny enough for me to sit down and listen to like his whole spiel or like go to a show, but also there's a couple clips that made me laugh before. So he's kind of in that range. What I would say about Andrew Schultz is that Andrew Schultz is pretty consistent on this is his type of comedy. This is what works for him. So it's not like he just came out of left field with this. This is how he's always done comedy. And to be completely fair, if you go to his shows or you see the videos of his shows and stuff, this is on par with other jokes that he would make. So that's pretty clear. I don't particularly agree with his joke style, and I didn't like his joke style on that podcast in particular, to be clear on my stance. But I understand that is his style. That's just what he does. All of his fans and supporters are still with him. Hasn't changed. Andrew Schultz, from what I've seen, has not is not in the state of apologizing for his statement. He's like, that's what we do. The one rule of comedy that I do understand is that you can say whatever you want whenever you want and however you want it, except one thing, it has to be funny. That's it. You can say whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, it has to be funny. If it's not funny, then everything that you said beforehand, it's subject for conversation. And that's what I think what happened here is that everything that he said here is subject to conversation because it seemed like the only people that laughed were the people that were in that particular room. Anyone that watched it was kind of just like, I mean, I get it, but also, it just wasn't hidden right. The cadence wasn't there. The timing wasn't right on that. And he spent way too long on the joke. It was like it started to become way out of taste, in my personal opinion, right? So that's just Andrew Schultz, putting him in the box for people to understand him and kind of the thoughts around that. Now let's talk about the Black community, the community as a whole, right? Because your question was about Black women, of course, and their image, and I can agree with that too. I think for the Black women and really Black people as a whole, there's definitely an image issue. And a lot of it has to do with the media and showcasing that image. And then part of it is, of course, with us for allowing our image to be portrayed in that certain way, right? So I don't condone this, and I feel bad for all Black women who feel that way. That, hey, I'm a normal person. I go to work, I work really hard, and I keep having this mindset being thrown on me that for some reason I'm combative, I'm a bad person, I stress people out, I'm the problem in every relationship, when that's not necessarily true. I can agree with that frustration, right? What I want to challenge is with that frustration is that we need to have, as a community, way clearer guidelines on what we accept and what we don't accept. Because a big argument I see out of this is that if this was a Black person saying this, people wouldn't be offended. I think it should be offensive all across the board because, like I said, it's a bad image that we're portraying on each other that I don't think is constructive to what we would like to do. Now, I get it, it's jokes, but still at the same time, I think there should be clear boundaries on this, right? So with Andrew Schultz, what he said, right? People don't understand. There's plenty of Black comedians that say that exact same thing. I think they should be held to a similar standard because we want to build up our community. It's too easy to joke about dividing and creating divide. I want to challenge comedians to uplift the people around me. Yes, stereotypes are funny, and there's very clever ways of putting that together. But if that's just if you're a one trick pony, that's all you do is just create damaging language that divides people, then I think as a group, we should be more firm, be against that for all comedians, not just Andrew Schultz. I'm talking about black comedians. I'm talking about other white comedians. There's other white comedians that we give this black card to where we say, oh, well, he can say it because he's one of us. Or he dates a black woman, so he could say it. No, no, no. Be consistent. This is what we're willing to let this is what we're willing to let slide. This is what we're not willing to let slide as a standard across the board.
Mhm. And I think that's you raise a question or a conversation that's even much more nuanced in the sense of like what is the goal and what are we necessarily protecting? I know one of this the discourse that ended up coming from this situation in particular was protecting black women, and I think that's something that we have to do for sure, on a a case by case method. But also I think, like you said, a lot of our things seem to be kind of like reactionary. And I get it. Sometimes our narrative is portrayed by people that are outside of what's named. So let me say, before we move forward, let me start by saying I don't agree with anybody speaking out on something that they do not experience. Right. So, for example, I don't speak for the woman experience. Like, I might speak about my perception of how I see it, but I also say take my words with a grain of salt because I'm not a woman. Right. That is not my goal. I don't like speaking on it at all. But also from a race perspective, I think that's even a little bit even a trickier question, or just knowing the climate of what's going on and within media. Not only this, but Michael Rubin made his comment, which I actually agreed with a lot of the basis of his comment a couple weeks ago on the Breakfast Club about perpetuating black violence. But it was just like, that's not for you to talk about. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that's not something you should think about and you couldn't have our best interest. It's just sometimes the messenger, right? Now, going back to your earlier point, that's why it has to come from us and we have to step up and say, yo, from our perspective, this is not that. And it shouldn't be they raising the question. And we, like you said, these things need to be raised by us. And so the thing that I didn't really like, I know the guys came out and apologized. They said they were kind of shocked about the whole situation. They didn't know how to react. And I get it. Like sometimes laughing is a response to, not understanding what's going on. I know people do that. I do that in uncomfortable situations. I'm not going to say that's what they did, but I'm saying I understand if that's the basis of what ended up happening. But um, from my perspective, I don't like the stereotype at all. And the thing of it is, like you said, when it doesn't land and you over explain, it's just like, yo, there's certain things you just don't do. And particularly for our women that are double marginalized, not only from a race perspective, but from a gender perspective as well. I have to understand that, like, I'm not going to take the time as a white male to perpetuate a stereotype about a black woman. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just not my place. And if you want to have those conversations off air, this and that, there, I think there's just a boldness to you even doing that. And I don't like that because I think, and this is a question that I have, and it's a conversation for another day, but I think some of these jokes get masqueraded by how people actually feel. I'm not saying this for him in particular, but I think sometimes you could wrap up how you really feel or a microaggression or something in that manner in the form of a joke. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. And I see that way too often. And I think sometimes that happens. And so that's where I have pause is that like, where do we draw that line? Like, can I just say, yo, I'm gonna throw anything out there, and if they don't like it, it's just a joke, right? That I don't really I have a problem with that because I think people can really get their thing off and how they really feel and just say, oh, it's just jokes like this and that. I understand he's a comedian. I'm talking about a overall macro level. I know people do that a lot. So before we move on into our next topic, do you have any rebuttal to that?
I just have a rebuttal about the podcast group Shits and Giggles. You're very nice, and I do
Mhm.
appreciate that about you. But I want to be very hard on them because this is 100% on them as well for two
Oh
reasons.
yeah, yeah,
One,
100%, yeah.
any content creator, I don't care who you are, any content creator, do not go on someone else's platform without doing your research on who this person is. Again, Andrew Schultz didn't come out of left field. This is consistently his content. This is what he does, right? So don't get on there talking about we didn't know it was going to take a turn like that. Like, no, no. You could have watched 4 videos previous to that and get a good gist of like what he's going to say, how everything's going to go. Second off, this wasn't a live. This was pre-recorded. You had all the time in the world to at least gather up proof to say, hey, as soon as it ended, we had to say, hey man, that little segment right there, like we didn't appreciate that. We wanted to be good guests. We laughed and all that stuff, made, everything cool, but we personally don't appreciate that. It's okay if you delete that content, right? And then Andrew Schultz himself came out and said, hey, they went back and actually had some segments deleted and never mentioned that segment. So this is 100% on them as well to say like, don't come back because something went wrong and then try to play victim. It's like, this is my flight or flight,
Yeah,
reaction.
fight or flight.
I
Yeah,
didn't know what to say. I just felt like to laugh. It's like, no, no, no. There's a calm way to state your point that you don't agree with it, but also not be too combative to where you go off and fight the guy. You could have made that very clear during the recording or at least after the recording, and you didn't do it. So that's BS.
I
The only
agree.
grace that I
I
will
agree.
give them is because they are a British African American. And one thing that black people need to realize is that not all black people have the exact same culture. It depends on regions, it depends on areas. They are British African American. I don't know their culture that well. So I'm not going to be the one to say, this is how you should act, this is how you shouldn't act. I've never been there. I don't know. So maybe that's something that's more acceptable in Britain, but at least outright say that. Say, hey, in Britain, this is how we joke, this is how we act, whatever. But don't get on there pretending like you were a victim when you weren't. You were completely complicit. And if you feel like that you weren't, you didn't do enough action before or after the fact to say that you were complicit. So that's all that I have to say on that.
Okay. I agree. I agree. And I think also too, and before we move on again, I just think that particularly with that point of view, like you could have addressed that in a such a and they end up doing this on Twitter a lot. They end up posting clips of even Andrew Schultz, people pushing back on him. There would be black people in there. And I know he had discussed black things before, and the guy was like, "Hey, like, yo, we need to protect our queens. Like, you need to chill out a little bit." So there is a way of going about doing it constructive, and I know it kind of when you get on air, it's like a, oh, I don't know what to do. I understand that, but like you said, it could have been addressed 2 ways. I could have edited this out, one, and two, I could have addressed this after the fact. I'm not gonna hold you. You are right. I'm not gonna hold nobody to their worst moment, and hopefully they learn from it. But at the same time, like I said, I think that's the tricky nature of when you speak on things you don't truly know, and you know the nature of what you about to speak on could be controversial. That this is the risky way. If you know this is not something not my expertise or something I could pull from actual experience from, and on both sides, from their perspective, is they're in Britain, they don't know the American black woman like that, and then from Andrew Schultz's perspective, it's like it's now y'all speaking on two whole concept of y'all don't understand. This is the risk you lay when you do that, and so hopefully they learn from it. If not, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's really, I think what we do here is we do our research and we are not going to speak on anything that we haven't either done our research, had our experience on, or we're going to say, hey, take this with a grain of salt. This is something that we just come to mind. And we don't really know, but this is how we perceive it to be. So, yeah, we'll see, man. I just think we need to be more responsible as content creators too. But that's a whole conversation for another day. But let's get into our last topic, Hale. This is your thing, man. It was two heavy topics. So let's get a little bit lighter, man. What we got going on in football, dog?